On this day in history, June 12, Nigeria remembers not just a date, but a symbol, not just an election, but a mandate. The mandate of Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola, a man who dared to dream of a new Nigeria. But before June 12, 1993, before the annulment, before the national outcry that followed, there was the story of the man himself, a story rooted in humble beginnings, in ambition, and in an unshakable belief that Nigeria could rise beyond its troubles. This is the story of MKO Abiola, the people's president. MKO Abiola was born on August 24, 1937 in Abeokuta, Ogun State. The name Kashimawo literally means "let us wait and see," a name given by his parents after losing several children before him. They weren't sure if this boy would survive, but he did, and not only survived, but thrived. From a young age, MKO learned the value of hard work. His family was poor. As a child, he worked as a firewood seller, a drummer at events, and a part-time laborer just to help his family survive. But MKO wasn't just a hustler, he was brilliant. In 1956, he earned a scholarship to study accountancy at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. There, he sharpened his academic and business skills, graduating with honors. When he returned to Nigeria, he joined ITT, the International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation, and quickly rose through the ranks to become one of Africa's most successful businessmen. By the 1980s, MKO Abiola was no longer just a successful businessman. He was a household name. He owned newspapers, airlines, and invested heavily in industries across Nigeria and beyond. But what made him stand out wasn't just his wealth, it was his generosity. MKO gave scholarships to thousands of students. He paid hospital bills for the poor. He built mosques and churches, schools and community centers. He was a Muslim who donated to churches, a Yoruba man who embraced all ethnic groups. In a nation divided by tribe and religion, MKO Abiola became a unifying figure, the embodiment of what Nigeria could become. By the late 1980s, Nigeria was under the heavy grip of military rule. Corruption, economic collapse, and political instability plagued the nation. The people were tired. They needed hope. They needed change. MKO Abiola sensed the nation's cry. Though he had never held public office, his reputation, wealth, and national appeal positioned him as a viable leader. But challenging the military was no small task. At the time, General Ibrahim Babangida, Nigeria's military ruler, promised a transition to democracy. Political parties were formed, elections were scheduled, but many Nigerians were skeptical. Would the military truly hand over power? In 1993, the opportunity finally came. The military government created two political parties, the Social Democratic Party, SDP, and the National Republican. His campaign was electrifying. He preached Hope 93, a promise of economic revival, unity, and true democracy. Farewell to poverty, he declared. Farewell to suffering. Abiola's campaign was not built on ethnic or religious lines. He visited the north, south, east, and west. Muslims and Christians cheered him. He was embraced by the rich and the poor, the educated and the illiterate. And as the election day approached, June 12, 1993, hope was in the air. For the first time in decades, Nigerians felt they had a true chance to choose their leader. But behind the scenes, forces were plotting. The military elite, power brokers, and vested interests feared what a free election could mean for them. Would they allow the people's mandate to stand? As Nigeria moved towards June 12th, the world watched, because what happened next would shape Nigeria's destiny for decades to come. June 12, 1993. The sun rose differently that day in Nigeria. For once, Nigerians were united, not by ethnicity, not by religion, but by hope. Hope that democracy was finally within reach. After years of military rule, after multiple delays and postponements, the people had come out in millions to cast their votes in what would become the most historic election in Nigeria's history. The election was unique in many ways. For the first time, there were no political godfathers determining the outcome behind closed doors. There were no tribal or religious fault lines dividing the electorate. Even more astonishing, MKO Abiola, a southern Yoruba Muslim, was overwhelmingly supported in the Muslim North, traditionally suspicious of southern politicians. His opponent, Bashir Tofa of the NRC, was from Kano, but Abiola still won the majority of votes there. The June 12th election transcended Nigeria's toxic fault lines. The people had spoken. The mandate was clear. International observers, including the Commonwealth, the European Union, and domestic monitors, declared it the freest and fairest election Nigeria had ever witnessed. For the first time, the ballot reflected the true will of the Nigerian people. The election was peaceful, transparent, and credible. The election used the Option A4 voting system, a simple open ballot method where voters queued openly behind the candidate's poster. This unique system made it extremely difficult to rig or manipulate results. From Lagos to Sokoto, from Aba to Jos, the people voted with pride. And when early results started coming in, it was clear. MKO Abiola was winning by a landslide. But just as Nigerians were preparing to celebrate the birth of the Third Republic, something sinister began to unfold. Within the military hierarchy, fear gripped the corridors of power. Many feared that an Abiola presidency would disrupt the delicate power balance. They feared his independent wealth, his massive popularity. They feared that under Abiola the military would lose its privileged grip on the nation's wealth and resources. And so, as vote counting progressed, rumors began to spread. Suddenly, the National Electoral Commission, NEC, was ordered to stop announcing results. The Nigerian people were confused. Why stop now? The votes had been counted. The winner was clear. Then, on June 23, 1993, 11 days after the election, came the announcement that would shake Nigeria to its core. The federal government has decided to annul the June 12th presidential election. The annulment was met with national outrage. Nigerians poured into the streets. They demanded that their votes be respected. They demanded that Abiola be declared president. But the military stood firm. General Ibrahim Babangida, who had once promised to hand over power, now claimed the election was flawed, citing undefined irregularities. Yet the world knew the truth. The annulment was not about irregularities. It was about power. The international community condemned the annulment. Sanctions were threatened. Nigeria was plunged into political turmoil. The nation that had once stood at the brink of democratic rebirth was now slipping back into darkness. Civil society groups, labor unions, students, and ordinary Nigerians took to the streets. The country was paralyzed by strikes, demonstrations, and clashes with security forces. MKO Abiola, still hopeful, called for his mandate to be restored peacefully, but the military was preparing for battle. The hope of June 12th had become the crisis of June 23rd. Babangida found himself cornered. Amid growing internal and external pressure, Babangida announced his resignation on August 26, 1993, exactly one day after Abiola's 56th birthday. But instead of handing over to the rightful winner, he installed an unelected interim government led by Ernest Shonekan, a civilian puppet, backed by the military. The Nigerian people had been robbed, not only of their votes but of their future. The military had snatched democracy from the jaws of victory. But the story of June 12th was far from over, because MKO Abiola would not give up, and neither would the people. With Babangida's departure, Nigeria descended into a dangerous political limbo. The military continued to pull the strings from the shadows, but in the hearts of Nigerians, the June 12th election remained a living wound, an injustice that refused to heal. MKO Abiola, emboldened by popular support, refused to back down. He insisted that his mandate, freely given by the Nigerian people, must be respected. He became the face of Nigeria's pro-democracy struggle. But as the political drama unfolded, another powerful figure entered the scene, General Sani Abacha. On November 17, 1993, barely 3 months after Babangida stepped down, Abacha seized power in a bloodless coup, toppling Shonekan's weak government. Abacha declared himself military ruler, promising to restore order and review the electoral crisis. But Nigerians had heard these promises before. This time, what followed was even worse. The Abacha regime quickly became one of the most brutal in Nigeria's history. Civil liberties were crushed. Opposition leaders were jailed or exiled. Journalists were harassed, beaten, or disappeared. And still, MKO Abiola stood firm. In June 1994, 1 year after the annulled election, Abiola made a bold move. Standing before a massive crowd in Lagos, Abiola publicly declared himself the rightful president of Nigeria. "I am the custodian of a sacred mandate, freely given to me by the people of Nigeria." It was an act of defiance, one that would cost him his freedom. Days later, Abiola was arrested and charged with treason. He would spend the next 4 years in solitary confinement, cut off from his family, supporters, and the world. The struggle for June 12th intensified. Inside Nigeria, human rights activists like Gani Fawehinmi, Beko Ransom Kuti, and Wole Soyinka led mass protests. Abroad, the international community condemned Abacha's dictatorship. Sanctions were imposed. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. But Abacha was unrelenting. His regime grew more oppressive with each passing day. For Nigerians, the promise of June 12th seemed further away than ever. But in 1998, fate took a dramatic turn. On June 8, 1998, Sani Abacha died suddenly. His mysterious death opened the door to a fragile political transition. A few weeks later, on July 7, 1998, exactly 1 month after Abacha's death, tragedy struck again. MKO Abiola, still in detention, died under suspicious circumstances while meeting with a U.S. delegation. The man who carried the hopes of millions was gone. The dream of June 12th had cost him everything: his wealth, his freedom, and finally, his life. But though Abiola died, his vision did not. In the ashes of his sacrifice, a new Nigeria was beginning to rise. MKO Abiola, the man millions called their president, was gone. But though his voice was silenced, his struggle ignited something that the military could not kill: the undying hunger for democracy. His death sent shockwaves throughout Nigeria and the international community. The military, already weakened by Abacha's sudden death, could no longer hold back the inevitable. In the months that followed, Nigeria stood at a historic crossroads. With Abacha gone, General Abdul Salami Abubakar became the new head of state. Unlike his predecessors, Abubakar moved swiftly to end military rule and begin a real transition. But even as Nigeria celebrated its first civilian government in 16 years, many knew that true justice for June 12th had not yet been done. Abiola's victory had never been officially recognized. His mandate was still buried beneath the lies of the past. For many Nigerians, May 29th, which became known as Democracy Day, was a painful compromise. It marked the handover of power, but not the restoration of Abiola's stolen mandate. The scars of June 12th remained raw. The annulment was still a national wound, but the story of June 12th refused to fade. Year after year, activists, journalists, and civil society groups kept the memory alive. The name MKO Abiola remained a symbol of sacrifice, a man who gave everything for Nigeria's freedom. It wasn't until 2 decades later that Nigeria would begin to confront its unfinished business. In June 2018, under the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, history was finally rewritten. On June 6, 2018, President Buhari declared June 12th as Nigeria's official Democracy Day, replacing May 29th. He posthumously awarded MKO Abiola Nigeria's highest national honor, the Grand Commander of the Federal Republic, GCFR, the honor reserved only for presidents. After 25 years, Nigeria officially recognized what the people had known all along. MKO Abiola was the true winner of the 1993 election. June 12th was no longer just a date. It was now a national symbol of struggle, sacrifice, and the power of the people. For many, this gesture brought long overdue dignity to Abiola's memory. Yet, it was also a reminder of how fragile democracy can be, and how costly freedom sometimes is. Every June 12th, Nigerians now pause to remember the election that was never honored, the man who paid the ultimate price, the resilience of a nation that refused to surrender its voice. June 12th stands today not just as a day of celebration, but as a warning, a reminder that democracy is never handed freely. It is fought for, it is defended, and sometimes it is bought with blood. MKO Abiola's story is no longer just about 1993. It is about Nigeria's endless pursuit of justice. It is about every citizen's right to choose their leaders, without fear, without manipulation, without military interference. It is the story of Nigeria itself. And though MKO Abiola is no longer here to witness it, his dream lives on, not in monuments or titles, but in every Nigerian who still believes that one day the country he dreamed of, united, just, and free, will truly rise. This has been June 12th, 1993, the mandate that shook Nigeria. Subscribe for more.